Welcome to part 9 of Subversive Symbolism. We're going to look at Astro Theology and the Order of Death. I wish to acknowledge Mark Capaccio for his podcast, What on Earth is Happening? Also Jordan Maxwell, David Icke and Michael Tessarian, who are experts on symbolism. They've all provided valuable information that has allowed me to put this presentation together. Astrotheology. Astrotheology is about the quartering of the Zodiac. It's the sun's path through the year, and it shows how the sun is both the giver and the takeawayer of life, depending on the sun's brilliance at the height of summer and a diminishing at winter. At the high points of the year is when plants are harvested and life is at its fullest. Autumn and winter, crops don't grow, and therefore it is called the season of death. When the sun drops below the equator in the Northern Hemisphere, this is when the solstices and the equinoxes create the vertically and horizontally aligned equal-armed cross because of the Earth's tilt in regards to the sun. The favourable season is the summer. It's the solstice line above the equator. It's the first part of coming up above the horizon, above the equator in spring, and then passes into summer. The sun goes around the zodiac clockwise during the year, during the 4 seasons. So Christianity is an astro-theological solar cult, and many of the features in Christianity are depicted. For example, Lent is an astro-theological ceremony. It's a season of sacrifice, to give up something. In the Christian story, Jesus gave up his life. That's the exoteric tradition. And most Christians believe this is a literal story, saying that Jesus gave up his life as the Son of God to redeem the sins of people on the earth. But really it is about the sun giving up life, the life that rejuvenates the earth continuously with its energy, warmth and heat and growth, for growth and life on this planet. Now, Christianity being an exoteric tradition, we'll see this as Jesus giving up something, but it's about sacrifice, and that's simply a proxy, meaning that it is something that is veiled over the top of the real meaning of the season of sacrifice, which goes back to a pagan cult, sun cult. In the ancient religions, they believed that you should give blood to the earth, give up your blood to rejuvenate life. Lent in the Christian tradition is 40 days. It leads up to Easter, typically March through to mid-April. And this roughly coincides with the occult calendar, 40-day period of the season of sacrifice between March 22nd, the equinox, and May the 1st. The main Sabbaths are holidays, special days for the occult. These were celebrations in ancient times, right up to the modern world. And they still carry a dark connotation in the dark aspects of the cult. The midpoint of these seasons are the Sabbaths. This is when occult traditions of the ancient world will be celebrating a holiday. They are the midpoints. May the 1st, May Day, also Walpurgis Night, is the first Sabbath, and that's the spring fertility rite. It's when something is offered to the earth as a sacrifice to ensure a bountiful harvest in the spring, the planting season. This is the Northern Hemisphere. The midpoint of spring is Taurus, which is the Earth's ruling sign at that time. May the 1st, or May Day, is between the vertically and horizontally aligned left side of the zodiac between Pisces and Aries, spring equinox. It's the midpoint of spring season, which points to the center of Taurus and the house of Taurus in May the 1st. And it is the 40th day of the season of sacrifice. This is when sacrifices would be offered to ensure bountiful harvest, ensure that crops would grow, and the sun would look favourably upon the earth. There would be a sacred marriage between the sun and the earth to create a lot of food and prosperity. This is when the dark occultists, who are looking for prosperity during the year, will invoke some form of sacrifice, usually involving humans or animals. And this also relates to mind control. Now, the next celebration in the calendar is Lammas Day. That's during the midpoint of summer. It's a celebration to give thanks for the harvested food, for the abundance that came about during the planting season, the season of spring. It's also a glorification of the sun in general, because the sun makes everything grow. So it's a celebration of the sun, and it's a form of thanksgiving for the abundance that was delivered again in the planting season. When the sun enters the southern hemisphere after the autumn equinox, the sun is losing strength. It is ruled by the water sign Scorpio. It is said that the sun has been stung by the venom of the Scorpio and is losing strength. The midpoint of Scorpio is October the 31st, and at midnight it is called Hollow Mass. The ritual of Hollow Mass is part of the season of the Sabbath. It's about death. It's about valuing life lived in its fullest, and for those that have passed on from this world. In the Christian tradition, it's known as All Saints' Day, which honours the ancestors of the spirits that have moved past this world. It's also a time when sacrifices are made. In modern society, it's been corrupted into Halloween. This date is probably the second greatest point in the occult calendar. Candlemas or Imbolc is on the 2nd of February. It's halfway through winter. It's a celebration of the coming of spring. It's looking forward to a time of rejuvenation. And we see this in prognostication rituals like Groundhog Day. This is a ritual where weather patterns are judged, whether it's going to be a prosperous spring, whether you could start planting early for a better harvest, or whether winter's going to be harsh and that you should rely on your supplies and hold out for the end of winter. Candlemas is a hopeful ritual in which you put your intentions forward for a good harvest and a good second part of the winter, so that the weather will not be too extreme. So let's look at the solstices. That's when the sun is at the equator in the season of sacrifice, and it's another way of looking at the sun's motion. The sun keeps going down along that line, going past the middle point, back to the middle and then to the bottom, concerning its angles with the Earth's equator. The top line is the summer solstice, when the sun is at 23.5 degrees northern angle at the Tropic of Cancer. The midline is the equinox, when the sun is at 0 degrees. That's equal days and nights. And the Tropic of Capricorn is when the sun is at its lowest, 23.5 degrees in the Southern Hemisphere. March 19th to 22nd, 3 days, is a period called Lucifer's Rising. This is when the Zodiac, represented with the sun in the middle of it, and the central axis of this image, the equatorial line, represents the point where the sun aligns with the Earth's equator at 0 degrees. It's March 19th, and that's a significant date in occult traditions. It's the eve of the spring equinox, when the sun is precisely at the equator. The lowest 6 houses of the zodiac, located at the lower half of the zodiacal circle, are referred to as the tomb of the sun, where the sun is dying. And it's during these 6 months the sun is positioned in the southern hemisphere, and that's less conducive to plant growth. Consequently, while the southern hemisphere benefits from the sun's presence. The season of sacrifice ultimately revolves around the concept of extinguishing light, which is the goddess, and she brings light and goodness into existence. The goddess is symbolized by a dove, representing the divine feminine force associated with emotional depth, and this force provides insight and understanding, leading to genuine moral action in the world. But like clockwork, the elite initiate human sacrifice on March 19. The Iraq campaign that President Bush stated as shock and awe happened on March 19th, as an example. And then on Walpurgis night, May 1st, Bush came out on the aircraft carrier to give his mission accomplished speech. On March 22nd, the sun breaks the equatorial line and forms a whole disk above the equator. It comes above the imaginary line that defines the equator. This is the 3rd day after the beginning of the equinox, when the Son of God rises from the dead. And this is the root of the esoteric Christian tradition. But it's really about the sun rising after 3 days of darkness from the tomb of Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, 3 zodiacal houses. The sun was what is at its lowest point in winter, the solstice on December the 21st and 22nd, and after 3 days he was born symbolically at Christmas, when the sun starts moving back again. The sun symbolically rises from his tomb after 3 days in the Christian tradition, and 3 months in the occult calendar as Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So that's rising out of the tomb of winter, coming towards summer. So understand that the sun and moon depict consciousness of higher beings. We need to bring the sun and the moon together to create balance and higher levels of consciousness, and grant access to Jacob's ladder, with the ladder being between the sun and the moon, representing the path towards higher consciousness. And out of ego-bound identification and awareness. So the favoured season is in the north. Then the season of darkness is when the sun is in the south. A casket, symbolically, is on the checkerboard floor of the house. And this represents being in base consciousness, bound in darkness. Humanity is in a deplorable state of darkness, but light is still streaming down from above. So the idea is to dig out of that grave, to resurrect oneself by understanding natural law, by receiving the light. And once you leave that grave, you'll see that the world is in ruins. Enlightenment casts light upon the work needed to repair a completely ruined world. March 22nd, or 322, represents Lucifer's rising. The sun is bringing light into the Northern Hemisphere. Dark occultists are a solar Luciferian cult. In Latin, Lucifer is lux fero, meaning light bringer. He brings the light on the third day after the spring equinox as the sun breaks past the equatorial line and fully emerges from the tomb in the southern hemisphere. Lucifer, the light bringer, rising from the dead to begin his journey toward higher place, towards the summer. The summer solstice, which is at the top line of the zodiacal wheel. So the third day after spring equinox, the sun's saviour, symbolically Horus or Jesus, breaks the sun free of the tomb of the southern hemisphere. The Order of Death. The clandestine Order of the Skull and Bones operates out of Yale University in the United States. Their headquarters is known as the Tomb, which represents the Southern Hemisphere. They are worshippers of death and darkness, and they pay homage to the sun in its dark aspect when it is in the 6 months of the aspect of the Zodiac when the sun is in its tomb. Their emblem is of the sorcerer, is the skull and the bones. The skull is where thought occurs. The bones are will and action. We use our arms or hands to do things in the world. And these are symbolic of thoughts and actions, so intelligence and power. That's what the symbol represents. The Order of Death members are intelligent, but the heart, which is true care, is missing in this emblem. There's no heart in the skeleton. The skull and crossbones represented through the intelligence combined with willpower to act without care. The sorcerer is become a psychopath, and he acts without care. They have killed the spirit. They have killed care. The depiction of the skull and bones warns that if care is killed, then so is the symbolic saviour. If you kill care, you are spiritually dead. You are in a coffin. No good will come to you or the world until you leave that tomb. The connotation of the light bearer or Lucifer relates to this tradition. The angel of light or the bearer of light brings understanding of natural law to humanity, but there is a dark aspect to Lucifer, the dark side of the sun, meaning intelligence without care, and this leads to psychopathy, ruin and chaos. This is why the dark occult is thrusting the world into chaos. People go along with the agenda of the dark occult, and they are still in this coffin because they do not want to change their actions to include care. They do not want to use their intelligence or will in a way that is directed with true care. The season of death, with the sarcophagus below the light streaming down into it from the light above, symbolizes that we need to get out of this spiritual death and come into light. Enlightenment is coming to awareness for light, coming to understand how much the world is in disarray, it is in disorder and chaos. The sun is at its highest point of power when the pillars representing the Tropic of Cancer 23.5 degrees to the north of the earth. The earth is symbolically depicted on the floor of that house. So astrotheology is teaching us about the season of life and the season of death. And this is really about our own consciousness. The planting season, represented by the 6 houses of the Zodiac, we experience the season of life. This phrase contrasts with the season of death, symbolized by the sarcophagus, the coffin, with light streaming from above. So this symbol urges us to awaken from our spiritual slumber into enlightenment. This enlightenment involves awaking to the disorder and chaos of the world. And that coincides with the sun's peak of power at 23.5 degrees north, the Tropic of Cancer. The earth is symbolically depicted on the floor's house, and to progress we must transcend our base ego consciousness and strive to embrace the higher consciousness of the gods. In other words, to climb Jacob's ladder. Dark occultists refer to people who unthinkingly follow their agenda as the dead. This is occult mockery. Soldiers who go off to war are tagged with occult symbolism. They are sent to the altar of sacrifice. They are completely ridiculed and mocked by people who know more about them than they know about themselves. Consciousness is being destroyed by ignorance, apathy, cowardice, and laziness. Ignorance is a destroyer of thought. Apathy is a destroyer of emotion. Laziness is the destroyer of action. If we fall prey to these, we end up in the grave. This is where the spirit dies. And we will be ruled by these dark occultists. The skull and the bones and the order of death. These dark occultists direct world events. They control the monetary system, and they can make the idiots of this world believe anything, to do anything, and they'll do anything for money. They'll do whatever they want them to do because of the promise of a certain amount of money. They can orchestrate world events because they own the monetary system. They invented it. Therefore, they can make people dance like puppets to any tune they want. Still, they do not understand that the people do not understand that the dark occults rule them. Unconscious, ignorant people are easy to manipulate. They believe that they are doing right, going off to war and any other number of things that are completely antithetical to natural law. So you will only reach a deeper understanding after time, effort, and study, dedication, and willpower. Different forms of symbolism require associative thinking. Symbolic literacy is a prerequisite for studying the occult traditions, understanding their real meaning, not listening to the fear-based propaganda of the elite. Now, the Kabbalah, as any other occult tradition, is not about one thing. There's a dark side and a light side to it. All of the mystery traditions have been perverted over time and transformed into something they were not intended to be. We must be aware of the dark side of the mystery traditions. The dark occult has infiltrated and watered down the teachings of occult orders that once taught truth. Often, occult orders become a club for influential people to operate clandestine agendas. These dark occultists, they don't invent mystery traditions. They take something that's already there and use it for their benefit. The mystery traditions existed before the dark occult took them over. The dark occult perverted and used it for their selfish agenda. Occult orders such as the Rosicrucians, in an unadulterated form, contain truth. And they employ symbolism, allegories, basic associative thinking, and rituals to teach natural law and truth. Now, an allegory is a story or a picture that can reveal a hidden meaning. The word occult means hidden. Occult traditions have fallen from their original intentions for several reasons. One of these reasons is that a dark form of occultism veils teachings. They keep that knowledge from people, as it wants to wield influence and use this knowledge as a weapon. Secondly, dark occultists may also be erroneously worried that people will take this knowledge in a very susceptible state and use it as a weapon against them. Now, both these reasons are in error. Humanity will only be free once the occult is no longer the occult, meaning that this knowledge is taken out of hiding and brought into the light of day, taken out of the fouled form, and then eventually it will become common sense. Without knowledge of natural law, humanity will be continually enslaved. People need to know about themselves and the procedure for studying oneself. So this concludes part 9. In part 10, we will look at sacrifice rituals that occurred during the occult calendar, talismanic symbolism, and geomantic symbols.